Hey, everybody. Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette here. We're going to pick things up mid-podcast. We usually do a single weekly video about Penn State, talking about everything going on, but there's a lot going on this week with the coaching search going sideways with Kalani Sitake. We did an earlier video about what has gone on, Penn State's chances to come back from this, and the consequences that Pat Kraft, the athletic director, may or may not face for how the search has gone. In this video, we're going to talk about coaching candidates past, present, and future. Some guys that have been on Penn State's list, including Kalani Sitake. We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about guys that are still available: Jeff Brohm, Brian Daboll, possibly Bob Chesney of James Madison, and some guys that they missed out on: Will Stein, Brian Hartline, these hot assistants. We're going to get into that whole conversation, but if it seems like it's an abrupt cut, that's because we were mid-podcast. We figured this could kind of be its whole own video. So enjoy. Isaiah, let's go maybe a little rapid fire here through some of these remaining names that are out there, have been on Penn State's list, may or may not still be in play. I guess first let's start with Kalani Sitake and that candidacy, just reaction to that being the guy that Pat Kraft pushed a bunch of his chips in on. I thought it was an odd fit, obviously, as a almost completely, West Coast guy. But I warmed to it. I mean, he was a very good coach there. I believe I saw the statistic. There's only 8 programs that have won more games than him over whatever the recent time period is. And Penn State was not on that list. So he's had a lot of very solid seasons in Provo. Granted, it wasn't against Big Ten competition, but he's an experienced head coach who's gotten results. He would have been a nice consistency hire, I think. The question is, are you going to be able to recruit on the East Coast with James Franklin in your backyard? We would have found out, but now we won't. I also I don't really want to pile on Pat Kraft too much on the simple premise of not getting Kalani Sitake, because I think it was a very unique situation of this guy. It's his alma mater. He has very deep ties there, not only in terms of the college, the football program, but spiritually. BYU is kind of its own animal in that way. So it's not necessarily that you didn't get the guy from BYU. I think the problem is that you waited until this late in the calendar to do it, and you should have had a much better read on whether this guy would or would not come to Penn State way earlier in this process if you were that interested in him. You probably botched things with some of the candidates who've gotten raises to this point. I don't think Kalani Sitake was probably their number one choice. There were probably guys on the list that they ended up losing out to because of extensions at their current schools, which again goes back to what we were talking to before about you don't fire James Franklin without a darn good idea of who's going to replace him or who could replace him. So to me, that was the mistake that made what happened here with Kalani Sitake so bad, was that you had botched the search to some extent before you got to this guy. And he was always going to be some level of a wild card because BYU is just a different animal than pretty much any program in the country.
No, absolutely. I think I was, when I first of all, I came out of left field. You just got to start with that. Like when you're seeing all of these reports, I saw his name maybe once or twice. I didn't really see anything super serious. And then suddenly just a few days ago, he's the front runner and he's most likely going to be Penn State's new head coach. Then you get the report the next day that, BYU is putting together a lucrative deal to keep him there. He's called it his dream job multiple times. It's his alma mater. He's been successful there since 2016. Big 12 football isn't Big 10 football, but it's not it's far from a scrub conference. He's playing some solid competition. He's been able to do very well. It would have been a good pickup for Penn State from a football perspective. I have my doubts about bringing in a West Coast guy who's not familiar with the scene much at all over here. And then considering that James Franklin stayed so close, I think that in itself, now it would bring in a new audience. You would be able to potentially bring in some guys from the West Coast. But I think, the people in the West Coast really die hard for the West Coast. It's hard to imagine that you would leave the West Coast, you're playing football over there, to come all the way to Penn State, especially given the state of the program right now. For the former head coach of BYU. BYU is a very good program. It's not an elite program. It's not one that's consistently competing for a national championship. I know they're 11-1 this year, but it's still, at the end of the day, I believe they're 11 or 12 right now. So it's not a program that is going to stand at the top. And, he's been able to do great there. But I think at the end of the day, it wasn't a end all be all hire. It's not one that because they didn't get Sitake, it's going to be a matter of Penn State is stuck in, doomsday for the next 10 years. I think there would have been some growing pains with him, but it definitely would have been nice to have a solidified guy who has coached relatively high level football and played against some really solid teams and be able to scrape out those wins and be just dominate.
Yeah, I mean, I warmed to it over the course of it, and it really rubbed me the wrong way when, like, the argument for why he shouldn't go to Penn State is, well, you're going to get fired in 2 to 3 years if you don't hit this delusional standard that the fans had. I said, hold on a second. James Franklin got 12 years.
12 years, come on now.
1 year for 5 minutes, and other than Bill O'Brien, who left of his own volition, the guy before James Franklin was Joe Paterno, who got 20 years of worse results than James Franklin had on the strength of what he did in 82 and 86 and the years before that. So let's not paint like Auburn hires and fires someone every 2 to 3 years. That's that program. That is not Penn State. I don't think that would have happened, especially with Kalani Sitake, because it's clear the appeal, and I said this on Twitter, was it's clear the appeal was that he could be he's a well-established coach who has a long track record of success. You don't hire that guy to capture lightning in a bottle. Is like we've talked about, and we will talk about Brian Hartline. Will Stein was another guy that came up in this process. Those are guys that you either find out if they can be head coaches at this level of football or not. Yep. And they might have been hire fire type of guys. Penn State was trying to capture lightning in a bottle with them, see if what they could do could translate quickly. It's clear they decided not to go that direction. So I really don't think if they had hired Kalani Sitake that he would have been on an immediate hot seat here. I think he would have been given a chance to kind of build things out. So, it's true. Like I said this also, you really can't say anything about Penn State online. People just say things that are just like wildly, like not at all about the character. And it's like, I guess a lot of programs see James Franklin and what he had and think that it was a capricious firing and think that Penn State is going to always have this like ridiculous standard. And I think it was no. Sorry, I'm rambling now. If any one game against a top 10 opponent of the last 12 years had gone a different way, I think James Franklin's still here. It took a lot for Penn State to get to this point. So I think they would have given Sitake a runway. Let's talk a little bit about Terry Smith here. We've talked about these guys, so I don't want to linger too long on most of them as candidates. But Terry Smith, I feel even more affirmed now in saying that I think you're higher on him than I am. I would give him a short-term deal. I would strongly consider giving him a short-term deal and saying, all right, Terry Smith, it's a unique situation. Many people around town, I think it's still true. It's not just like people had this emotional swell during the Nebraska game. I think a lot of people still fall in the category of he deserves a chance at the job. You know that you will have a better chance of retaining the program that you have if you keep Terry Smith. So I think that as a damage control hire, keeping as much of the current roster in place as you can because those guys are bought into him. And then if things don't work out a year from now, you can go right back into this hiring cycle and say, all right, we gave Terry Smith a 2-year deal. We don't like where we are. We think we can get someone better. Sorry, Terry, we're going to move on from you and we're going to go get someone that we feel good about. You can do that a year from now and maybe not have the damage control that you're going to have to do if you go some other direction. I guess my question for you, Isaiah, is would you give him more than that? Because you seem to like him a lot. Would you give him a 5-year deal and say you are the guy, no questions asked?
I wouldn't go that far. I know I've been an avid Terry Smith supporter, and the reason for it, I think, has only just been kind of, elevated a little bit more through seeing what was going on with some of the players when Sitake's name emerged. Like, you saw a lot of guys just take to Twitter, no names specifically, I forget some of them, but just a lot of them just not happy about the current state of what was going on. And I think, to your point, it's better to play damage control when you have more time to play damage control. And time is the one thing that Penn State does not have right now. The season is over. The bowl game is approaching. And when that is done, your football is done for the year. You got to wait until the season starts back up. And then at that point, the only thing that can be on your mind is getting this head coaching situation just finalized. And I think Terry Smith, regardless, and I understand we talk about the James Franklin firing being something that was emotional, but to me, I will always go back to the point that Penn State this year has been at their best under Terry Smith and not James Franklin. When you look at Penn State and what they've been able to do in terms of, coming back from the 6-game losing streak and turn it around in these last 3 games of the season, and seeing how the passing attacks develop, seeing how Katron Allen has just emerged as one of the best, if not the best production, he's one of the best, if not the best running back in the Big Ten. And for a large portion of the year, he was splitting carries. Nick Singleton has reemerged under Terry Smith, as opposed to the performances he was having under James Franklin, struggling to get 40 rushing yards. I don't think that they would have been in a position to break either of the records that they did if James Franklin was still the head coach. We saw advances in the defense. Now, obviously, you heard Terry Smith call their defensive performance against Rutgers terrible. If you look at KJ Huff, I mean, he's just an animal, and I'm not going to get into that too much, but that catch was absurd, probably the best catch I've seen all year. But Rutgers is one of the best passing attack offenses in the league. They still managed to scrape out a win. They look grittier. They played harder. They played more cohesively. This is the best Penn State has looked all year. And I think because of that, you need to channel that. You need to grab on to the semblance of what you once were. And I think Terry Smith can offer that right now. You're going to mitigate the turnover the best you possibly can if you keep Terry Smith, as opposed to bringing in a guy who at this point is probably not going to be your first, second, third, or fourth option. You're going to get somebody very low on your totem pole, because a lot of these guys have already signed contracts, or it just looks like you're not willing to commit. You're going to have the best luck keeping Terry Smith. And to me, it's low risk, high reward. Like I don't see much of a reason not to give him that 2-year deal. Because like you said, if he has a poor year, you can move on from him. Already have it in the back of your mind that this is a prove it deal, and you can start to source outwards and plan to get a new guy in there, as opposed to having to do all of that right now, because it's evident that they waited way too long to get this coaching search. I don't want to say get it underway, but really put their foot on the gas and commit to it. It seems like they were really moving slow during the season. And I think now it's come back to bite them in the behind. I think Terry Smith at least gives them some time to stay competitive. And best case scenario, this program is able to be turned around under Terry Smith. And then you get a guy who you're paying essentially pennies in comparison to some of the other grand scheme guys, some of the proven head coaches. If Penn State can turn it around, win 8 games next year, win nine games next year under Terry Smith, and that's being incredibly hopeful. But if you do, then you did it with really nothing. And then if he's bad, then you just have more time to get a new guy. I think he's the best possible guy at the moment. And I think that he offers Penn State a little bit more time to get their identity all together, keep a lot of the roster who I think can still keep Penn State. There's some guys on this roster that I really think could shine for Penn State, and I would hate to see them leave.
Yeah, and I mean, and you can tell there's all sorts of people you can say you gave him a shot. You can tell Terry Smith you gave him a shot. You can tell all the people that are supporting him you gave him a shot. You can tell all the people that want the Joe Paterno influence in this program again, we gave it a shot.
Yep.
And maybe that tempers and blunts some of that moving forward. And, maybe Terry Smith works out. And I don't want to say I don't think he won't work out. I think there's a chance. I just think it's a lower chance than some of the other people that they had the opportunity to hire and might still have the opportunity to hire. So, I think there's a solid case for him. Let's talk a little bit about the guy that the Kalshi prediction markets, and I have a separate soliloquy on that, Isaiah. The Kalshi prediction markets right now are all over Brian Daboll, the former New York Giants coach. All right, I'm going to say this about the Kalshi thing, because either people just don't understand how this works, or it markets itself as something different than it is. To me, it is a social sentiment tracker. It's purely driven by whatever is on Twitter. It is a reaction to Twitter and how people are perceiving what they're seeing there. It's a totally public facing thing. There's been no point in this process that I've looked at these Kalshi prediction markets and said, what do they know that I don't? What inside information is? It's just purely a reflection of what's happening on Twitter. So it drives me nuts to see people say, well, this coach now has a whatever chance of going to being the Penn State coach. It doesn't matter at all. It is a social sentiment tracker. And if you're putting your money and your faith in this I don't even want to call it a tool, then you are not super bright, in my opinion. So I don't want to put massive credibility in Brian Daboll because this Kalshi thing has had like 20 different people over the course of this search of like having like 40% likelihood, when I don't think that was ever the case. And if you ask Pat Kraft, I'm sure he'd say exactly the same thing. So that said, Brian Daboll is the person that Kalshi is all over at the moment. You are a Giants fan. You have familiarity with him. We've talked about him a little bit. My opinion has been he doesn't necessarily have the experience at the college level that you need to be like a CEO type. He is an NFL guy, and we've seen these NFL guys struggle with that part of the job. Way back when, it was more about going into recruits' living rooms and selling their mothers. Some guys just didn't ever want to do that. Now I think it's much more this NIL like CEO type of position driven by the talent acquisition that I don't know that Brian Daboll has proven anything in that regard. So I was down on it when we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and I'm even more down on it now because I'm not sure he's the guy that gets you out of this crisis.
I was down on it the moment you started talking about the whole, you feel like you got to be a head coach and a GM in this day and age in college football in order to really elevate a program. I'm not even sold on it as a football mind. I don't think he's a great coach down the stretch. And I think that's something that, these late game collapses, these coming up short against, tough opponents, I think that's almost become synonymous with Penn State. And I think the last thing that they need is to get a guy in at the helm who was quite literally fired for blowing leads, for allowing 39 points. And I understand, we can say it was Bowen. Bowen got fired too from the Giants, but at the end of the day, you're the head coach. You allowed a team to score 39 points on you in the fourth quarter. You had multiple other late game collapses. You didn't get fired because your team got injured. You got fired because despite your team getting injured, you were able to use the personnel and the players that you had to go up on these teams. And then when it came down to the late third quarter, fourth quarter, you folded. You got in the situation and you made it so your team was unable to win down the stretch. And it's the reason the Giants are 2-10, or not even 2-10, 2-11. Sorry, we just got cooked by the Patriots. So that's why you got fired. And to bring a guy like that into Penn State, knowing the state of the program right now, it's not like he was a phenomenal NFL head coach who has proof of being a real player's guy or being a face of a program or a franchise that is beloved, can really attract people. He doesn't really have any of that. The only thing that has him in this conversation objectively is, his ties to Penn State. I know those Kalshi rates odds went probably skyrocketed when that picture of him in the snow and the Penn State hoodie was taken because, his kids went here. Alma mater, stuff like that. Like, I understand, but it doesn't make him the best candidate possible. It doesn't make him the guy going to turn Penn State around. I think getting pretty much any college guy who is familiar with the recruiting landscape, who is familiar with the landscape of college football right now, is going to be better than bringing in a NFL football mind. And I'm going to put air quotes around that because I don't think he excelled at that. So I'm probably as low on this as anybody could possibly be. He's not the answer. And if it was between him and Terry Smith, I'm definitely choosing Terry Smith.
Let's talk about Jeff Brohm. He's another name people are focusing on at his, a longtime proven coach, kind of in that Kalani Sitake mold, just not quite as successful. Part of that is the programs he was with. What are reasonable expectations for the coach of Purdue? Now you've been at Louisville. You've had a couple solid seasons. He has an identity. He is the type of guy that could import a program. So is he the guy I would have fired James Franklin for? Probably not. Do I think they could do a lot worse than Jeff Brohm right now? Probably. It's very funny. I play college football 26, and James Franklin got fired early, like in my dynasty mode, and then Penn State hired Jeff Brohm and won multiple national championships. So that's just a fun little personal anecdote that means nothing, but it's funny to watch. Am I living in the world of the video game? What's going on here? So yeah, no, wouldn't have been my first choice. Don't know if he would have been my fifth choice, but I think you could do worse at this stage, especially from a continuity perspective of he could bring a lot of guys with him from Louisville. You could basically retain some level of roster between what's at Louisville now, what's at Penn State now. So I think there are a lot worse candidates in the situation. I actually probably would like him a little bit more than Terry Smith if you can get him at a reasonable price, if you can give him a solid NIL budget to go portaling with. So, yeah, that's kind of where I land on him. Do you have any thoughts on Jeff Brohm?
I keep it short and sweet. I'm inclined to agree. Honestly, I feel like when you look at a coach like Jeff Brohm, probably one of the highest things that would put him on this radar is, despite being at a school like Louisville, which has been able to put together some solid seasons, he gets it done in the face of adversity. They beat Miami this year, had Carson Beck looking just objectively stupid out there, like no shade, but it was a very, very bad game for Carson Beck. And he gets it done against top 10 opponents, something that, despite, James Franklin's long tenure here at a school like Penn State, has struggled to do. So I think you get a guy like Jeff Brohm to come in who's already had success against the best of the best at a school like Louisville, and you get him here, you give him the resources of Penn State, you tie in the fact that he would probably be somebody that a good amount of people in the locker room would be okay with, and then tie in the fact that you can bring in some guys from Louisville as well. The roster turnover might not look quite as bad. And I think he's a great football mind. And I think that he does a good job of keeping a school like Louisville that without him probably wouldn't be as good at this stage of college football. I think he's somebody who should absolutely be on the radar if they can bring him in. Obviously, he's not somebody who you throw $9 million a year at, $10 million a year at, far from that. But you get him in on a solid deal and he can come in and do what he does at Louisville here with way more resources, a way bigger budget for NIL, way larger reach. I think it could be something for Penn State.
Bob Chesney, as far as I know, is at the time of this recording, has not been officially hired by UCLA. The public reporting is that's where he's going. You would imagine that they're a decent chunk of the way down the line, but if the contract was signed in ink, we'd probably know by now. Is there any part of you that's interested? I remain just as skeptical as I was a couple of weeks ago when we talked about him. I think he was mostly the favorite of the overrepresented coal region of Pennsylvania in Penn State media. There's a lot of homerism backing, I think, Bob Chesney's case. Could he be good? Sure. Do I think he has any better case than any of the people that we've discussed to this point? I do not. I think it's just a lot of boosterism from the 18 Penn State beat writers that live in like a 70-mile radius of Hazleton, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm going to keep pretty much the same stance I had a few weeks ago. I think if you stack them up with names like Jeff Brohm, when you stack them up with names like Kalani Sitake, I don't think that he's substantially – I think he's below them. He's probably on the same level as Jeff Brohm. He's obviously had more success at James Madison, but it's a different level of football, and we have to keep that in mind. But I think the ties that he has here could make him solid, but I just think that if the expectation was for him to come in and be the guy, like I wouldn't lump him in the same, he wouldn't get the deal that Kalani Sitake would. And, we have the same perspective of Sitake is not a guy that you would bring into fire in 2 years if Penn State wasn't able to turn things around. I think Bob Chesney probably does fall in that category because of the level of football he's coached thus far. And despite his success, he's not the kind of guy who I think you bring in and, give a 6-year deal for a substantial amount of time because he's the clear answer to your problems. I wouldn't go that far. I would be more inclined to give a guy like Jeff Brohm that deal than I would Bob Chesney. Big Ten football is drastically different. You need to see it for yourself. I think that he would be a solid option. I think a few weeks ago I had him around the same level as Terry Smith. If not, I favor Terry Smith a little bit more. So I just think he has the ties. I think recruiting wouldn't be as big of an issue, obviously, with him being a native to the region. But I think hope is all but gone. It's just a matter of when he signs with UCLA now. If some, unspeakable, unbelievable turn of events was to happen and he was suddenly open, do I think that Penn State should go for it? I wouldn't be mad at them for going for it, but I also do think that it's important to recognize that with the state of this locker room, pretty much anybody who you bring in who isn't Terry Smith it's going to lead to a full rebuild.
Yeah, well, and I've seen the argument I would be mad. I'll just say that I would be mad. I've seen the argument made that, well, if you were going to want to end up hiring him in 5 years anyway, why wouldn't you hire him now? Because there's 8 million guys that you could make the same case about who've won at lower levels of football.
Yep.
That have the Kurt Cignetti. Kurt Cignetti was not the only guy that won at the Division II level, that won at the FCS level. There's plenty of them that you could go to at any time. You're Penn State. You want someone to prove it. UCLA is the program that hires Bob Chesney for a reason, because that is where UCLA belongs in the pecking order of the Big Ten. They are the ones that have to go for the pure upside hire. If you're Penn State, the upside hire you make is the guy we're going to talk about next, Brian Hartline, or Will Stein, who ends up going to Kentucky. These whiz kids that have been coaching at very high levels, that have been exposed to the Oregons, that have been exposed to the Ohio States, that in Brian Hartline's case was instrumental in making Ohio State what it has been for the last 7 to 8 years, when it has been able to get over the top and is likely going to be the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. That's the caliber of young guy, unproven as a head coach, that you go after. It's not the guy that's coached at these lower levels and has had a little bit of success at James Madison. The only reason we're talking about him is because of where he's from. It's the same as with Matt Rule. When we had to entertain that for as long as we did. If Matt Rule had that resume anywhere else, we wouldn't be talking about him. And I feel the same way about Bob Chesney. So Bob Chesney has to prove that he can be a Jeff Brohm or a Kalani Sitake to me before he's the type of guy that Penn State should be investing in. So sure, he goes to UCLA and lights it up and you want to hire him in 5 years, I'm fine with that outcome, because then I will have known that this guy proved it to some degree. And maybe that means you make a bad hire now, but you can look at the process and say that that's the reason. I guess quickly, Isaiah, do you have thoughts on Brian Hartline going to South Florida? That honestly, if you put a gun to my head at the beginning of this and said, who do you want? Who do you think is the best option? Brian Hartline was closest to my heart. So I'm a little bummed that he is not the choice. I get it. Inexperienced. It's a high stakes hire, but given where the situation he ended up in anyway, he would have been the guy for me. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
I said, listen, we were in the same boat. I thought Brian Hartline and, Will Stein. I think Dan Lanning has been, phenomenal at Oregon. I think he's a guy that if Will Stein was able to have any sort of the same pedigree and, execute at the same level as Dan Lanning, he also would have been a great hire. I think Brian Hartline and what he's been able to do the past few years at Ohio State, even this year, as their offensive coordinator, as their play caller, they've looked phenomenal. We've seen Ohio State time and time again just dismantle teams from an offensive and defensive level. So, and you got to give a lot of credit to Hartline for that. I think the South Florida job, when you look at it from an objective standpoint, it makes sense. First time collegiate head coach, it makes sense why that's the first job that he got. Now, whether it was a matter of Penn State simply not pursuing or Hartline not wanting that to be his first job, given the state of the program, or same thing with Will Stein, that until reports come out, I personally don't know. A lot of people were probably in the same boat, but I think especially Hartline would have been somebody who I wanted up high on my list, namely just because of what he's been able to do from an offensive level with those wide receivers. He's time and time again been able to produce elite NFL level talent, have them be elite college level talent, and is a massive part of why Chris Henry Jr. is going there, is going to be a massive reason as to why any future wide receivers in the high school classes would have went there. And I think if you get a guy like that in that Penn State, then you're going to see an influx of wide receivers looking for that same tutelage and looking for that same success. And I think it would have done wonders for Penn State's passing attack, especially if you think that Grunkemeyer is the guy for the future. It would have been a solid move for them. I think, same thing can be said for Will Stein, but just to a lesser degree. I think Dan Lanning has been great. Like I said, if he keeps the same pedigree, he would have been a solid hire as well. But they were unknown. You don't know for 100% what they were going to be able to do at the helm of a program. And I think that the job at Kentucky, the job at South Florida, those are more fitting jobs for them, giving their experience. But I have no doubt that they're going to be able to excel there. One, because it's a slightly lower level of football, but also because I think that they are incredible football minds.
Anyone else on your personal radar, Isaiah? I will say that at this point, when you've already done the damage that you have, I wouldn't mind waiting it out for Joe Brady. You're not going to salvage the high school class this year. You could probably bring him in during the transfer period. Now, I mean, I guess it depends on how well Buffalo does, and maybe you don't want to take that gamble. But Joe Brady's a guy I like a lot. I understand why it's probably not realistic given the circumstances, but he's on my radar. Is anyone on yours that at this stage of the process you're looking at that maybe you weren't looking at before?
I still think that, Drinkwitz is a solid option. We spoke about
Didn't
him.
he get a new deal, though?
Oh, did he? I didn't even see it.
I thought he did, yeah. Maybe Penn State could outbid whatever that is and give him a better deal, but I thought he got an extension.
Yeah, so much news going on. I didn't even see him get an extension. I can tell you who's not on my radar because it's not going to happen. Kalen DeBoer is not coming to Penn State. Just have to drop that one in there real quick. I don't know. I've remained firm in thinking that Terry Smith is at least the short-term option that gives Penn State the best chance to make a comeback and also more time to further vet coaches. And I think that's just where I stand.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Isaiah, Penn State will be selected for a bowl game this weekend. Amid all of this, any destinations you would like to see? I mean, the Pinstripe Bowl seems to be like the destination that makes the most. I have a hard time imagining the Pinstripe Bowl passing up Penn State if it has the opportunity, just because there's a lot of alums in the area that would definitely come to the game. We saw that in 2014 when they were there for their first bowl game against Boston College. I had a guy tell me it was the loudest he'd ever heard Yankee Stadium, and that included the 2009 World Series. So I think they would jump all over that, and especially if you can get Penn State. I want to see it regardless. I think some people will say, well, Penn State's going to have an exodus. What kind of roster will it have for that game? You're probably going to lose to Pitt. I still want to see Penn State whenever it has a chance of being a thing, especially now that James Franklin's out of the way. I'd be curious, especially if Terry Smith became the coach, whether there would be some openness to renewing that rivalry, getting it back on the schedule in the near future, because I know Pitt would love to play it. So that would be my preferred bowl destination and situation. But I also know Penn State fans like to go somewhere warm this time of year. So maybe you got a different idea in terms of where you'd like to see them play.
I don't have a different idea, but we have the same idea for a different reason, because objectively, I think that Pitt would be the best caliber opponent that Penn State could play. And I think if they were able to get a win out from Pitt, especially if, Terry Smith said it earlier a few weeks ago that he has confidence that his team is going to play in the bowl game. Now, obviously, as he said, does he think that there's going to be a couple of guys that have some personal situations or, just not play in the bowl game for their own reasons? Of course, that's going to be unavoidable, but he has faith that the vast majority of his guys are going to be available for the game. And if you look at that, and if, Pitt, when they just last week was ranked 22, if they're able to go into the Pinstripe Bowl and beat Pitt, it's, once again, I'm not going to go as far as to say it's like a resurgence of Penn State, but it's a very, very quality win for Penn State that could do some legwork for them, some heavy lifting in terms of showing that the state of the program is not as poor as people might think. And I think if they were able to do it confidently, then it only helps them with that, the coaching search down the line to show maybe opposing coaches that it's not as terrible of an opportunity, to show recruits that Penn State is not as far gone, to show current college players that it's still a destination that is worth going to. I think there'd be a lot of upside for Penn State if they were able to beat Pitt. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't be the end all be all. It wouldn't be Penn State is, back if they beat Pitt, but it would be something.
Yeah, and I'm always biased this is the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So we're always going to see it from a Pittsburgh perspective. I know not all of the Penn State fan base feels that way, but Penn State's good for business. Let's be honest. So I'd love to see that game play out. We'll either way, we'll be back next week. I mean, if Penn State has a coach before then, you'll probably hear from us again. Penn State probably should have a coach by the time we next speak. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're new here. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And please consider subscribing to our written work at post-gazette.com. Lots coming your way from Isaiah, maybe myself, depending upon what happens. So like, subscribe, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.